Jeff Ritzman.
Wow, what was that? Jeremy Vaeni?
That was me saying Jeff Ritzman.
Oh,
That's you. That's your name.
sound like you're under duress there.
No duress. I'm in paradise.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay.
This is a really good and really, I think, informative and fun episode with one Dr. Tyler Kokjohn, who, if anyone fell off the planet in the last year and doesn't know, he is a doctor. He is a professor of microbiology, right? Is that right?
Yes.
At Midwestern University. And he's working on a cure for Alzheimer's. And when he's not doing that, he's participating in Project Core and trying to solve the whole alien UFO abduction thing.
Because this is what he likes to do on his off time.
That's right. Carol Rainey actually sent us all an article that could change the field of abduction research forever. Because basically it's about a DNA sequencer that is about to become, let's say, cost-effective in the next couple of years. So we're going to get into that and a heck of a lot more in the next couple of hours. But Jeff actually isn't around for the first part of the interview because, your electricity went out?
Yeah, I had a hell of a storm. Yeah, on the way home. Lots of lightning, and I'll put it to you this way. When I picked my wife up from work tonight, it struck across the street. I got a front row seat for nature's fireworks. And wow, you talk about the ground shaking. Good Lord.
Wow, what did it strike?
As near as I could tell, the ground, I couldn't see the actual impact point, but I could definitely see the big white line in the blinding flash across the street. So, I mean, it was right down between some buildings. So it was really close and enormously loud. So when we got home, there was no juice flowing. And it comes on, I guess, about halfway through this or so.
Yeah, it comes on at what should be the end, but then Tyler graciously gives us another hour and 20 minutes. So,
oh, fantastic.
So it is indeed the middle, yeah. And something that you had said during our just private discussion afterward about the, a whoop whoop sound or something preceding this UFO, right? Or some sort of encounter. Sounds like a UFO coming into existence.
Yeah.
Coming down the street, coming up the drive, something. But it just reminded, what I'm going to say doesn't really have to do with that sort of ish. Let me be more vague. But you had asked me last Wednesday, I guess it is, or a week ago Wednesday, whether I've had any strange experiences in this new apartment that I'm in Hawaii, and I had said no. But then that night, I don't know if I would categorize these as weird experiences, but just talking about that sound reminded me that night, in my right ear, it felt as though, in my left ear, I can hear crickets and whatever is going on in the room, which is nothing. Mm-hmm. And in my right ear, coming out of my ear, it sounds like something in my ear coming out, if that makes sense, is this sort of low oscillating sound. And above that, which feels like coming into my ear, is another high-pitched sound in just my right ear. And I listened to that and I thought, well, that's really strange. And maybe this is because I was snorkeling and got water in my ear or something. I don't know. But then last night, as I was recalling it to myself, as I was recalling it, it happened again. But not the high-pitched part, just the low thing. And I just listened to it for as long as I could and concentrated on it. And it's just the act of concentrating on it made it louder. It was strange. And it's just, I don't even know how to describe it except that it's a low and intermittently, I would say, oscillating sound. It's not a constant whoa, 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 but right. But does it and then becomes a whoa and then whoa, 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 and just sort of does that. It kind of reminds me of binaural beats or something, but it's only in my right ear, and it's, I don't know, the sense of location is strange.
Huh. It's odd that when you I guess I should ask this before I say this, but when you concentrate on it and it gets louder, is that when the oscillation takes place or the solid tone takes place, or didn't you notice?
No, neither. It just gets louder.
It just does. It just gets louder. Okay. Yeah, I mean, with binaural, I find that if I concentrate on the sound itself rather than just let it drone, that's when I get the back and forth. Whoop, 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 whoop. Then I can hear that. But if I just kind of drone out and ignore it, that's when it becomes the tone. I don't know if that means anything or not, but
weird that it's just the one ear, you know, and then the left ear, and it's like last night my left was in the pillow and my right was up, and then when I switched positions, all of a sudden with my left ear now I can hear crickets again, and I'm still hearing this whoop whoop whoop. And in both times, I mean, it eventually just went away. You know, it just left of its own accord. It wasn't like I fell asleep with this thing there. It just went away. But my switching positions didn't affect whether it went away or not. So I don't know what any of that means, but just throwing it out there.
Interesting. Yeah.
Maybe a new wrinkle, maybe tinnitus.
Could be.
Who knows?
Could be a suffocating gecko under your head. So
that could be, yes. I thought I had one gecko in here, and I thought it was traveling because it's been in the bathroom, it's been in my bedroom. And then when I shut the door to record tonight, I noticed that there were, in fact, 3 geckos in here. So now they're all in this room with me.
Well, he's invited his friends over. So.
Yeah, perfect.
As long as they clean up their mess and they don't leave bottles all over the table, why should you care?
Yeah, I don't care.
And he needs to kick in some rent at the same time.
Yeah, I mean, they're certainly a lot easier to watch the Oscars with than my actor friends in New York.
Wow, see, there's a Photoshop job for me. You sitting in a chair watching a small TV with 3 geckos gathered around, kind of lounging and watching the Oscars.
Yes.
That would be good.
Talking over the Oscars and being silent during the commercials, just like New York.
I see a Paratopia t-shirt here.
Very good. Well, should we get to the man of the hour, or do we have any business up front?
No, we should get to it because it's rather long, and I hope everybody digs it because it's really long, but it's good.
That doesn't sound good.
No, it's really long. I mean, I can't remember a show going this long before, considering you were going before I even showed up, and I feel like I've done a whole show. So, yeah, this is a long episode, but it's great stuff.
But it'll fly by. It'll be like watching JFK. Not the not the director's cut that's long and bloated, but the one that's just perfectly edited and you don't notice the 3 hours.
This is one magic bullet.
And it's not even 3 hours, so get ready. Here we go, right after these commercials.
If you record audio for any purpose, chances are you want it to be heard. You want to attract the largest audience possible who can hear your message. That's where we come in. We're cyberears.com, a revolutionary internet service that will host your audio files and help you promote and track its popularity. Considering hosting a podcast to the world? We have all the automated tools to make the process as simple and easy as it can be. No technical mumbo-jumbo to work out. CyberEars.com does all the work for you. You record it, we take care of the rest. So don't delay. Go to CyberEars.com today and register for a free trial account. Upload your audio files and get heard. With CyberEars.com, it's your audio on your terms.
Hi, my name is Sater, and I have a podcast called Transmissions from the Bunker. I talk about nonsense.
No, Sater, we talk about a lot of things that aren't nonsense.
Oh.
Like politics.
And bourbon.
And religion.
And grammar.
And the news. We talk about the news.
And f***ing kisses.
And video games. And music.
And audio nerdisms.
So if any of that interests you, tune in live Sunday night at 9 Eastern or find us at the-bunker.net.
Or don't. Whatever.
Paratopia, without further ado, please welcome to the program our returning champion, Dr. Tyler Kokjohn. Dr. Kokjohn, thank you so much for coming back on the show.
Well, thank you for having me, and I hope that I can give you some good information tonight.
We'll see about that. Before we get into sort of the meat of what this interview is going to be, you thankfully had called in on the live show last Sunday and talked to us a bit about near-death experience. And in there you gave away the big secret that you're actually a materialist and don't believe any of this stuff. So my question to you is, for something like near-death, what could be considered evidence that you would find intriguing?
Well, the whole phenomenon is interesting. And I think we kind of touched on that why do people see these things? Why do they see similar things? There must be some interesting chemistry, some interesting brain physiology going on. And so it's one of those things that I would say sounds strange. I believe it's a real phenomenon, and that people are reporting things that they've experienced. And I would like to understand what it is that happens. So, does it indicate cosmic consciousness? I'm not willing to go that far. I guess in one sense, I'm with Chris Carter in this journey to a point, but I'm not walking all the way into that light.
Very well said. But what could be an evidence? In other words, what could he write? What could a researcher come up with? Because it's not like, the whole alien thing is, show me a spaceship and then I'll believe it. Well, with this, it's like, pull Jesus out of the light and then I'll believe it. I mean, what could they actually come up with that science would go, okay, this is indicative of cosmic consciousness?
That is a toughie. And I don't have a really great, easy answer for that. We're dealing with something that literally is within the brain, within the mind. And it's really, really hard to think of something that could be brought out that would say, oh, yeah, clearly that indicates it. What I would ask, or what maybe one could do is, excuse me, I've had a terrible cold. Is there a way that one could interfere with, I think he posits a receiver-transmitter mechanism. So if you have that, if things are going back and forth, then the first thing I'd wonder about is, could I interfere with that? Could I put these people in a Faraday cage, for example, and they would never get this signal? Or if they were sedated in a certain way, you find anecdotally that you don't get anything. And that would be one thing that would make me think, if there was something coming from the outside, could I block it? Then I'd start to get very curious. Not easy to do, but it's something that comes to mind. It's a tried and true genetic technique, and that is destroy it and see what happens. So abrogate the ability to communicate and see what happens.
Well, for you personally, do you now? I know we can't prove anything scientifically, but personally, do you believe that the physical is embedded in consciousness, or that the consciousness is embedded in the physical, mind is embedded in the brain, or emanating from the brain, purely a brain function?
I right now, I'd have to say, in the absence, this is going to be circular, in the absence of some kind of compelling proof that, the brain is in fact going to give us the mind, the consciousness, that it is rooted in the physical, the function of the brain, neurochemistry, electrochemistry, all those things. Is that what you were trying to go for there?
Yeah. So then when you look back on, say, Buddhist or Hindu literature, that not the purely religious stuff for religious folks, but the stuff that seems to be indicative of people who explored consciousness and brought back knowledge about themselves and about the way things work. Is that lost on you? Do you look at that and you go, that's not indicative of anything larger than us. That too is in the brain.
No, not automatically, because in one sense, if you want to think about it, literally everything is. There's reality, there's our impression of it, and then what we act on. And so I would say that these people who find things out about themselves develop techniques for altered consciousness, meditation, what have you. Those are important and useful. And, I think I'll just tell you that meditation works for me in some ways. And I'm far from a master, but no, I think there's a lot of value here. And so I'd like to have my cake and eat it too, sir. I'd like to be a materialist, but say, as those things of value come up, and particularly the thought processes, the introspection, I think those are phenomenally important.
What is it about you where you're able to have this conversation with me, but the secular humanists who pose as skeptics, as we've seen recently on the Bad UFO blog forum, is that what it's called?
Yes.
Bad UFOs. I'm having a little back and forth. It's civil enough, but you can see they want the knives and daggers. I mean, it just always goes that way. Why is it that you don't go knives and daggers on this and your colleagues do?
Well, I tell you honestly, Jeremy, I've been there. I've done that, and I caught myself. I wrote you a little email today. Alfred Lemberg, of all people, wrote something. And you know how every now and then you get a mirror and you see yourself in a new light. And I realized that I had been doing some of the same things I think that you're experiencing and maybe a little frustrated by with other people. And I thought, this is not really what I want to be about. This is, it's me, it's what I've done. I have to own up to it. But in terms of the larger ideal, no, that's not what a scientist should do. You may, I think, get to the point where you say, no, you're wrong. I don't believe this. I don't get that. You made an error here. But you've got to also let yourself kind of go with it and learn not to rise to the bait and jump in there and start to try to be the smartest guy in the room. Okay, because if we did that in a world of 7 billion, there'd only be one really smart guy, and the rest of us would be lesser. If you want to think of it that way. So it's not like I've got any major tricks. I still fall back into the same shorthand. Whether you're voting for a presidential candidate or trying to parse the data, sometimes we do fall back on these kind of easy ways to do business mentally. And I thank Mr. Lemberg for pointing that out to me.
Huh.
Yeah, I know. Now, you wouldn't think there would be two people more diametrically opposed in their ways of doing business, if you want to call it that. And yet, in a lot of ways, you can ask Mr. Lemberg if he feels the same way. I've never asked him this directly. We're on the same team. And we're kind of after the same thing. We're trying to find things out. And so we don't need to necessarily one-up, attack, denigrate, however you want to put it. But it's a challenge for me. It really is. Okay, naturally aggressive in these regards. It's a challenge.
Who do you more identify with then at this point? I mean, because it seems like, from what I'm reading at that bad UFO blog, the skeptical position is that ufology is ufology, and they've so poisoned the field that it's their fault that they get laughed at. So they're just doing the laughing. What are they, So go blame UFO researchers, and there's certainly merit to part of that. Then the other part is your own responsibility to not call yourself an investigator if all you're doing is poking fun and laughing. So are you a man without a home? Do you not identify with either?
Yeah, good question. You're really pinning me down here. These are tough tonight. Yeah, I guess in a way I am a man without a country, so to speak. What I would say is there are some people in ufology who maybe haven't done very well. And what I would say is, okay, we criticize them, and then that's it. The subject still stands. And the interest or whatever these objects are, let's say UFOs, the mystery still remains. There are things in my mind that are not necessarily justifiably dismissed or even easily explained. Sometimes they are fine. We have those. But there are some others that are very intriguing. And so just because somebody out there blew it, or they're talking Pleiadians or some other thing, and I don't agree with that, that's fine. That's their problem. The rest of it, no. My colleagues, I think they largely think I'm an eccentric and just kind of ignore this particular issue with me. As long as I meet my classes and serve on my committees, I'm given pretty wide latitude by them. But, in terms of, if you look at my exchange on that same blog, the same day, actually, as you, instantly I would go in there and say to Mr. Schieffer, hey, dude, there's a project here. Why don't we get on it? And then it's over to him. And I'll be very anxious to see if he's game. So there's a lot of people I can work with, and I'll work with them. I may not necessarily agree with everything that they say. And That's one thing I've learned about in science. You would think that on these collaborative teams, it's all gung-ho, one for all. And no, my friend, no. It can get pretty tense on these teams. And there are all kinds of interesting interactions amongst the scientists. So it's a strange world.
I should add that, right, Robert Schaefer, that's the man who runs Bad UFOs. And, funny enough, when I was addressing him, I really didn't know much about him. So I was sort of poo-pooing the idea of skeptical organizations that are actually secular humanists in disguise, posing as investigators, not really sure if he was one of them. And then I went and did, of course, then afterwards I did the background check and saw who he is. And it's like, oh, no, you are, one of the founders of this stuff. So,
step one.
So
everybody made that mistake, Jeremy.
But when you were in that mode of whatever you want to call it, arrogantly poking at retards. I don't know.
God.
I don't know.
Oh man,
you probably don't want to call it that. Did you go to conferences? I mean, did you spend your time reading these types of books? What is it about? Well, did you do that before I get into it?
I did. I actually.
Why would you do that?
It's an interest of mine, in UFOs in particular. Not alien abductions, but UFOs have been an interest of mine since I was 12. And I read a book, Flying Saucers, Serious Business by Frank Edwards. And I found it very interesting. And then at that point, I got everything I could get my hands on for a long time. And then you're too young to remember, but the Project Blue Book report came out. And it just let the gas out of that balloon. And being in high school at that time, I wanted to have a science career. I could tell which way the prevailing thought wind was blowing, and that kind of ended my UFO career for a long time. And then James Korean came out. He was the head of MUFON a few years back, and he was talking about trying to get scientists into the field again. This was probably 5-6 years ago now. And I saw that, and I thought, well, heck, maybe I could do something.
I'm a scientist.
Yeah, and I've always had this interest. So I got in touch with him, and he was interested, and I talked to Robert Powell. And in MUFON, I've met some very interesting, sharp, and sincere people. But really, I was a UFO guy until Paratopia. And then I think I mentioned before that some of the things that happened, Emma Woods in particular, drew my interest because I was following the show, got more into paranormal, just kept kind of going along because it was interesting. And that's how I got really drawn in to the what in heck are these abductions about? Because I'll just tell you honestly, until I started listening to Paratopia, I had no interest in abductions, and I thought it was simply a place for loons. And this is where I caught myself, Alfred Lemberg caught me doing these things, just dismissing out of hand. And I think that you maybe felt that today from the bad UFOs. Is you get a story, why do you automatically assume it has no basis in fact? That was me. That was me. And it was a shock to realize, wait a minute. Come on, just think about it. What is going to hurt you to go with this? Play it out as if it were a scenario in physics. What if? And go along with it and find something out. So I came to the abduction things much, much, much later, and really by accident. But in terms of going to meetings, I've been reading books, all kinds of them, all different subjects now. It burst of activity with the abduction books because I knew nothing, absolutely nothing. Just started picking them up and churning through them. I went to my first meeting last Saturday, and that was the UFO Congress in Scottsdale. So I had not been to a meeting before that point, and that's where I am. That's the status. So it's been,
and that was the same UFO conference that Mr. Schaefer was writing about, right?
Yes. In fact, I saw him wandering around there. And I saw a number of the luminaries in the field. And so that was very interesting because I always like to lay eyeballs on the people, kind of size them up, sit in the background,
Yeah.
back in the weeds, just kind of watch. And so that was interesting to see some of the players. It was fun.
I don't understand. See, this is the thing that gets me. I don't care anything about NASCAR, and you will never see me at a race. What is it about UFOs where it's like even people who hate them and think this is all lunacy, will pay money to go and sit at these events? That just boggles my mind.
Yeah, and it was well attended. Well attended. All different kinds of people. I can't really say there was a certain type. Very, very white. Okay, I mean that caught my eye. I'm not used to that in large groups. So I don't know if that's a national trend or not, and maybe it could just reflect the location. Scottsdale in the wintertime is a pricey place to go, and you got to have the cash flow and the free time and whatnot to be there. So it could draw a certain crowd just based on the time of year.
Yeah, well, I noticed in the events that I've gone to that it's usually primarily white and a lot of elderly.
I wasn't going to say that, but I was. It's the over 60 crowd is well represented. So
very good. Well, let me just give you one more here. Is there anything that you have read or seen in the UFO literature or the abduction literature or any of the paranormal stuff that was, I won't say persuasive, but I will say was intriguing enough that you find it disappointing that the professional skeptics glance over it or laugh at it?
I think I understand why they glance over, and just to be very blunt, the incentive for a professional scientist to work in this field is very minimal, and that's because other areas will yield so much for your career, so much easier and so much faster. I can't tell you how much easier it is. So if I work in the laboratory and I've got little pieces of brain and I'm grinding them up, I'm going to have some biochemical data. I chase a phenomenon, whether it's something that people report to me anecdotally as an experience or lights in the sky. And at the end of the day, I'm going to have very little in hand. And I think that that's literally half of the battle, is that there's no payout here. And it would be, honestly, a very difficult way to build a career as a mainstream scientist. In fact, I just come out and say it would be utterly impossible. And so I think part of the brush off is a kind of disdain for something that won't get you anywhere. And is that right? Are there things that are interesting? There are things out there that just intrigue me. They just interest me. So I'm going to go around now and find out a lot more about near-death experiences. And this is what Paratopia is doing for me. You're dragging me into these things and showing me new stuff. Very interesting. It's just for me. I think Jeff came out and said, "What do you want from all this, Tyler? What do you want?" And I'm just having a great time learning stuff, and it's fun to kind of roll it around and turn it around. And I hope that maybe one day we see something. Whitley Strieber described how during his talk, that's why I went, how he and Anne, by looking at the letters that people wrote, and she wrote a book called Communion Letters, that she made the realization that somehow the death experience was involved, or overarching theme of what they were encountering. And so, maybe we'll catch a glimpse like that. I'd love that, but I really don't know. And honestly, I'm not worried, because for me, it's just kind of, let's have the experience. Let's see where we can go. So have I had a galvanizing moment where I say, aha, there it is? No, I have not. But maybe tomorrow.
But what you have had, I think, which is good, is, getting interested in the abduction stuff right at the point where we're, detonating the entire field, so that you can come in and be a part of Project Core, which may, has the potential, at least, of starting to forge new ground there. You basically saved your time and energy not reading all of that hypnosis literature. And you get to be on the ground floor of something that may or may not reformulate how we think about all this stuff, or help to.
I think it is an interesting time to be there. Seriously. And I don't know what forces and factors move us around in life here and there, but I think maybe Jeff mentioned once that we meet people for a reason. And I have to agree with him, because I look back at my life and I can see that for me, when I've been ready as a student, the teacher has appeared. And but you really do have to be open or ready to a certain degree. And that's where I feel in the past, particularly with abductions, making the mistake of just being refractory, just a knee-jerk, nope, this is stupid. And so even if it wasn't, I wouldn't know. I was the one being stupid at that point. But, live and learn. Live and learn. All you can do is realize where you made mistakes in the past, try to do better, reach your ideals tomorrow, hopefully.
Very good. And on that note, and we will get back to that conference. Don't think you're getting away without talking about that conference, mister. But
it was fun. It was fun. Interesting. More crystal skulls than I've seen in a long time.
Right.
So, don't laugh. I got a crystal skull on my desk right here.
Wow.
I bring it up. It's cosmic. It's made out of quartz, actual quartz. So.
All right. Well, like I said, we will get back to that. We will circle on back to that. But let's talk about Illumina. Basically, Carol Rainey, who unfortunately couldn't make it tonight, but she had sent us an article, I think, from the New York Times. Is that right?
Yes.
Talking about something that will now. This is interesting to me because we can, like you say, we can't say what any of this stuff is. But we're at a point where we can narrow down what it isn't. So it's not the stories reflected in hypnotically retrieved testimony, but is it still hybrid aliens? Well, now there's something on the market where we can test for that, right?
Exactly.
Why don't you explain to us what that is?
Well, Illumina is the name of a company, and it's a play on the word for illuminate or light. And they have new generation sequencing technology, DNA sequencing technology, fast and very convenient. And so now it is possible to do the whole genome of a person or persons, cells, for example, in a matter of a very short time and in a relatively small cost. One could, if you were an investigator, for example, our laboratory at Sun Health, might invest in the machine. I think I sent you the brochure that they put out about the machine. But you could also utilize their services as a physician. So if you had a patient, for example, and you couldn't pin down a diagnosis but suspected that perhaps it was genetic, you needed to do the whole genome, they could do it for you in a matter of a couple of weeks. And I think we're looking here at around a $10,000 price tag, which is considerable. The technology, though, is changing every day. Every day. The speed is increasing, the throughput cost is decreasing. And the Illumina program or device is kind of the latest and greatest of a field that is getting very crowded and advancing further every day. So you want to think about the way that the technology has changed. The first human genome, the Human Genome Project, took over 10 years and billions of dollars to complete. Not too long ago, a few years back, a whole genome could be done in about 2 weeks' time, slightly different technology, for under $50,000. And that was quite an advance, obviously. Now we're getting to what the NIH the National Institutes of Health, have decided is an important goal, the $1,000 genome. And they actually have a project to facilitate these companies competing and coming up with new technologies. And there are so many different ways. They've been so creative that the NIH has a project they call the $1,000 Genome Project. And they're going to hit this mark soon. Now, some people have maintained that when you get to $1,000, you will have genomes done as a routine part of medical practice. So you're going to get your blood type done, your lipids and everything with a blood draw, and then boom, oh, and by the way, here's your genome. We're coming to that. We are, in fact, coming to that day. So it's just remarkable what can be done. And in terms of abduction research, are they hybrids? Is this person or entity or whatnot really carrying alien genes? Yeah, we could get right after that. And I think what's interesting about the situation now is that the pressure will be on. What was once a hypothetical, a throwaway, well, we're hybrids. This is a program of genetic colonization. Now becomes a legitimately real testable idea. In fact, it has been approachable for a while. But I will agree, cost has been prohibitive, and some of these have been difficult. Those days are ending. Those days are ending.
Wasn't the article about a $900 portable device, or am I wrong about that?
There are several different things that they're looking at now. The portable and the $900, they're more for profiling, the quick stuff, where you can go ahead and say, oh my gosh, does this person have glucose 6-phosphate dehydrogenase deficiency? And that will be, for example, important if you need certain anti-malarial drugs, for example. You can't have them if you have that marker. And so I think the really cheap ones, the low-cost ones, are dedicated for certain swift use with markers. And you don't have to do the whole genome for that. You can go right to the target. And that's the profiling.
But this is not something where David Jacobs could go to, Elizabeth's place, the woman who had the hybrids in her house using her computer, and swab the joint down and figure out whether humans had been there or something else?
Not for 900. It's a little more involved than that. But in fact, the forensic techniques, yeah, you may, if you had a real hybrid there and they were half human and half God knows what, you could possibly pick up the samples from the keyboard or from the area and figure that out. I think it's still on the NPR site, there's a description as to how some remains from World War II were finally identified just a few years ago by matching samples to, believe it or not, envelopes that this young man had sent home, letters home, when he was in the service. And he had licked the envelopes. And that saliva left enough material on the letter so that 70 years later, they could characterize it. Wow. And they matched it. Yeah, I think, I can't remember now, it's been a while, but people can look this up. But I think there were 2 or 3 sets of remains. You can imagine what they looked like after the Pearl Harbor battle. They couldn't quite really assign based on blood typing or whatever was available at the time. They just weren't sure. But they were able to pin it down with the DNA evidence that his mother had saved for all of these years, as if she knew that one day those letters would pay off. They were obviously important to her for other reasons. But that's the power of these techniques. Not simple. You got to sample the keyboard in the right spot. It can be very frustrating. But my point would be, keep after it. Stay alert. You get a chance. My God, Dave, all you need is one. And you got the Nobel Prize. And God knows what else. The adulation of the world for all time. Yeah, just one.
Well, here's where I think they're going to trip up the Barbara Lambs, the David Jacobs, the whoever's of the world. They're going to say, oh, well, it's hidden in the junk DNA. Does that play? Does that have any meaning in regards to this technology or at all?
No, make my day. Put it anywhere. Okay? I don't care. The technology can find it. First of all, there is a term, junk DNA. You are correct about that. What you have to watch out for is that we don't know quite what it does. We're not even exactly sure how the genome parses itself out into genes, for example. We still don't know all the rules and mechanisms and whatnot. So no, it really won't matter where it is.
Well, wait a minute. Is junk DNA common to everybody? Like the things that we call junk, is that uniform in every human, so that if something else showed up as junk DNA, it would register as different?
It would. In fact, the junk DNA, the reason that people suspected it's junk or non-functional is that its mutation rates are higher. It can vary quite a bit more with less consequence than, say, a protein coding region. And so we thought, well, it's just really not doing anything. It's like some kind of space saver. And not so clear. But as we learn more and more, that so-called junk DNA may do more than we had thought. There might be more function in there than we're ascribing to it right now. But nonetheless, all that variability, those are simply handles for people to look at, map, identify, assign. It's variability that one can use. So if you have a whole new stretch of DNA just stuck in there, literally just crammed in there, the map, the physical map, the sequences will change. You'll see that. And if you have something that literally is half human and half from another planet, another evolution, different pathway altogether, and that's put in there, I think you'll see something.
Does this go for the parents of kids who claim their kids are starseed and indigo children and all that sort of stuff? I mean, in other words, if you're born here and you think that you're different, will that show up genetically?
Oh my God, yes. Get me one of those. I'm being silly. You've noticed I have not rushed out to do this work. I would say the onus is on the investigators. But yes, if you have parents of children who are supposedly of a different genetically descended lineage, or parts of them are, that would stand out. You would, in fact, be able to see that. And so that would be a great test case. And it would be quite interesting. So look at it this way, Jeremy. If you had somebody had adopted a child, and the mother and father contributed their DNA, let's say there was a tragedy, and there were bodies, and they were trying to assign them, the adoptive parents would have a very difficult time being linked to that child because they were not the progenitors. The maps will be there. They will tell us. And that would be quick. In my opinion, it would be a very quick demise for the indigo child.
Right.
I mean, just boom, gone. See ya. What's your next idea?
Well,
and in science, that's fine. Hypotheses flame out all the time. Make a new one.
Yeah, not so much here. 60 years around hypotheses. But what was I going to say? Oh, yeah. Some people make a big deal out of abductees allegedly having, what is it, O negative or O whatever it is, blood type. Does that mean anything to you? Why would that be any sort of characteristic that stands out to people?
Let's see. The O blood type is what, 45% of the population? No. It's not in and of itself. If you had a string of, let's say, 15, 16 abductees, and every single one of them was O negative, because I think the RH negative is, what, 15% of the population. They have to look it up. I can't remember exactly now. Then you might start to wonder what was going on. On occasion, some O blood types, for example, are associated with differential disease risks, for example. Just cholera susceptibility is one. But no, just that finding does not really reflect anything important to me. Just the mere fact that they're O negative. If you go in the levels of O, A, B, and O are the different the big blood types. Those differ in different populations, and so they do have some differences. So, but in and of itself, that particular description of the person is not very informative.
What about by way of alien implants? Have you looked into that? Is there anything there that intrigues you?
Well, it's fun. Mr. Strieber has talked about an implant that apparently is still in him. And I have indeed looked. The UFO hunters had talked about UFO implants. I think they examined one. Quite honestly, I haven't seen anything that really gets me all excited. They look like nothing in particular to me when you pull them out.
Well, let me ask you this. We had Wes Owsley on a while back who had talked about them being perhaps ion channelopathies. I think I'm saying that right. Which are basically mineral deposits and other sorts of things that build up and form a ball under the skin, usually below the waist. That would show up as having almost meteoric content. So, it's because it's basically a bunch of ions from various sources in the body, and so they don't register as any one particular thing. And so when you extract them, they show up. They register basically the same as an unknown, and that this is just a natural occurrence in certain people. And so that could be one explanation for some of these BB-like things that they're extracting from alleged abductees below the waist.
Yeah. Okay.
But that's not something that you'd heard of?
Well, I have heard of finding these objects in people is actually not that uncommon. And it's not like everybody has one necessarily, a big lump under their skin. But I've heard that a lot of people who work with machinery, for example, often have slivers and things that get into them. So it's not something that's like, oh my God, we've never seen this before. It is not that rare by any means.
No, but the case is that's being made, I think, by Dr. Lear, is that these things have meteoric content, and so how is a piece of meteor getting under the skin? And the fact is, it may just naturally be forming under the skin and look like it can register as meteor.
That is an interesting idea, and I think with that, what they're usually saying is that they're iron nickel, as meteors are, enriched in nickel. But just if you want to do the math on that, that's not far enough, okay? Because the meteors can come from the local area, old asteroids and other debris floating around. And we need to get the device to Zeta Reticuli or someplace else, a little bit further away. So they still have the local grown problem, if you want to think of it that way. One of the other things, too, if you want to do the math on it, is these things that are supposedly under control, and so they will evade the surgeon. Maybe you remember that UFO Hunters episode where they were going after this thing on a fluoroscope and it was moving. And to me, that looked like the soft tissue was moving as they poked at it. But nonetheless, it's interesting that those objects always just die when you take them out of the body. Now, maybe, okay, let's say they're powered by the body. But who controls that, and where would they be? And if it's not autonomous, and if it is autonomous, then you really have a difficult problem explaining how the device generates enough power to navigate itself through tissue. But if you also want to have non-local control, something I was actually thinking about with the near-death experience and cosmic consciousness, I think I wrote somewhere once that if the controlling entity was, let's just say, on Mars, 35 million miles away, how long would you have to signal from Mars to Earth before the signal arrived? And I forget, light travels 186,000 miles per second, so it would be, a minute or two? I'd have to actually go through the math. And that would mean that as they move the hemostat, that device would have had to have anticipated that a minute or two prior. You see, you can't get very far away. And that's, if somebody's pulling the strings, pay no attention to that guy behind the curtain. That guy behind the curtain's got to be pretty close. We should be seeing some of this. If you want to, talk about how these things are managed to be controlled. So in terms of do the implants do anything for me, with UFO Hunters, they raised my blood pressure, is what they did. And that's where I learned not to rise to the bait. Okay, just go with it and then just start doing the math, and that's enough for me now. Okay, I don't yell at the television set as much as I used to.
Well, that's good. That's good for your blood pressure. Well,
Yeah.
I mean, what I was going to ask then is, well, gee, maybe, and I don't mean this condescendingly at all. I mean this seriously. Maybe we should email Roger Lear information on the channel ionopathy or ion channelopathy, however the hell it's pronounced. Maybe I should get it right first in my head and then email him about it, because maybe he legitimately doesn't know about it. Maybe it's something that is rarely known even amongst doctors.
It's something that I had not heard of, but I am not really, a practitioner, a medical doctor in that sense. So I can ask our the guy that's our MD, teaches pharmacology, and I'll ask at Laszlo Kereshin, I'll ask him how much he's heard about it. He usually is pretty up on most of the stories like that, and I'll let you know what he says. But yeah, for me, it doesn't play out so well. But with the internet, I just get out there and ask questions. And some of the investigators are like mummies. They never respond, okay? But others, and it might surprise you, get right back to you, and they'll go, oh, yeah, that's interesting, and back and forth. Stan Friedman was one that I asked some questions of, and he got back to me right away, and we had a nice exchange. And he was very warm.
Did he call you a nasty, noisy negativist?
He did not. That's probably what he thought, but he did not. And so, you never know what to expect. And that was a very pleasant surprise. Sometimes you just basically get no response whatsoever. And that can even include people who are out there just pitching a bitch about how mainstream science won't, they don't, they aren't, and say, hey, could I help? Silence. So interesting.
Yeah.
Live and learn. Live and learn.
Well, let's circle back to the UFO Congress. That's what it was, right? The UFO Congress?
Yes.
And once again, let's circle back to bad UFOs, because you had an exchange on there, or maybe still are, with somebody who was in a photograph that Robert Schaefer had taken of some sort of device, right? Or these two guys who claim they can tell if you're a hybrid. What's that technology? Dare I ask? And what do you make of it? Tell people what the exchange is that you had with this man, and what you make of the response. Because you didn't actually see it, right? You didn't see this?
I did
display?
not. I did. It's like, we meet people for a reason. I was so close to the Nobel, Jeremy. So close to the Nobel Prize here. I walked around there, and this
thing doesn't just tell you alien DNA. This will tell you whether you're related to angels.
Okay, now here's the problem that we have. This is relayed secondhand on Mr. Schaefer's website. And so we have the story that we believe is the case. Now, what they were doing was screening for implants. And they had some kind of scan that they did, which I presume is a metal detector, but I don't know that for a fact.
Scan or scam?
Well, this is an interesting... I don't know. But we'll have to establish some of the facts. And anyway, one of the people that was talked to was apparently told that, I think it's she, has hybrid DNA, or is a hybrid, and some angelic DNA. Now, we just went through the list of where the technology is for DNA sequencing. I don't know what they did, but apparently it's a non-invasive protocol. Extremely cheap, okay? Because I don't think that a check for $20,000 was written for this. And it is a real-time determination of hybrid DNA. Whoa, baby. Could we use that? I mean, I can't tell you the riches that would befall someone with that capability and with that technology. Cancer research alone. A lot of times the tumors are sequenced and they're looked at to see what mutations they have so that they know what drugs to use. Lives could probably be saved right now. I mean, this is the ironic thing. You come back and these people make these statements and you're going like, well, if that's true, you really ought to get this out there. because there are people that could benefit from this in real time right now. So again, I don't know what was done. I'm trying to find out. And I proposed an experiment that next year, there was a young man who got scanned. I propose that all of us show up and find out, what the story is. Are we hybrids? Because, my God, what could I do if I was a hybrid? With the experiments I could do, sir. I mean, it's unbelievable. So is it a scam? Right now, I don't believe one frickin' word of it. Okay, the onus of proof is on them. But I say, wow, prove to me I'm wrong, and I will throw rose petals in your path on the way to your induction into the National Academy of Sciences.
I'm just wondering how one differentiates angelic DNA from alien DNA.
Yeah, what the hell is it, would be my question. Okay, well, let's just get right down to it. I didn't know there was such a thing. But now that there is, they could tell me the sequence and I'll search for it. I'll go. I don't know if you remember, but we did a search for Vaeni King in the sequence databases, and it's there. Okay, if they tell me what the sequence is, I could go through the publicly accessible databases and find out where angelic DNA resides in all of us. And wouldn't that be interesting? And what does it do?
You just hope it resides in all of us.
Well, that's another, God, you really, man, you're driving me into some new science here. Yes, let's make a hypothesis. There are some people that alien DNA, first of all, would never found, and second of all, if it got in there, it would die. Okay, no way. The other DNA would just beat it up, throw it out, rob it first. Okay.
The evil DNA.
You got it.
Well, so all of that aside, then, what did you find at the UFO Congress that you thought was intriguing? Anything?
The thing that was most interesting is I wanted to see Whitley Strieber's talk, and he
Why is that? Why were you so interested in Strieber?
I got his book, and I had heard him on your show, and I read the book, and really, honestly, I'm kind of stupid, and so I didn't get all the connections. Okay. Crop circles and everything. I know that he's reaching out, but I'm not seeing it. I'm not getting it. So I was hoping for more insights there. Didn't quite get them. It was mostly stuff that if you read the books, you'd already heard before. But nonetheless, he gave a very nice talk, got a standing ovation, seemed to be very well received. So that was interesting. Just to kind of lay eyes on some of the players there is fun. But one of the things that did intrigue me was I was there with my next door neighbor, and we went into the vendors area, and there was a group there. We can't figure out what the heck they were selling. It was some kind of, I don't know what. And Len and I talked to them for quite a while, and never really grasped what it was. And he thought maybe they were trying to sell some pictures, but they were not very particularly good or interesting pictures.
Is this a colleague of yours?
He's my next door neighbor,
oh.
And so he indulges my fantasy with going out, and we will look for the UFOs and things. We've heard there have been sightings in North Phoenix, so we've been out looking and never see a thing. So I don't know if it's a bad attitude thing, but
at least you're doing the work.
We're trying, man.
I mean, all these debunkers, all they have to do is look up, right?
Well,
it'll change their entire worldview if it happens.
Exactly. You do wonder what would happen to a really rabid debunker if they had an experience. I mean, it's an interesting thing to think about. Would they? Maybe they would just fall silent. You'd never hear from them again. I don't know. But yeah, what an interesting thing that would be.
What is your overall assessment then of Strieber, having seen him live?
He really, really is a wonderful speaker, and he puts obviously a lot of time and effort into that. He's a great writer, and it shows. And so he can really tell a story. And they had his wife Anne was there, and they kind of shared the duties. And she picked out some of the more compelling communion letters, basically, that they had gotten. But it wasn't the enlightenment that I hoped for. Yeah, I was hoping for more about, here's the specifics about how the crop circles tie in and how the other phenomena tie in and what it's all building for. And I didn't get that. And maybe people who talked to him privately afterwards. I did not talk to him. I had the book, but there were so many people around him. I wanted to get it autographed, but he was not available. So plus it was lunchtime, and don't get in front of this crowd. Come out there for lunch. That's one thing I learned. So next year, I know how to save myself.
Can I pause this for 1 second?
Sure.
Ladies and gentlemen, we're being joined by one Jeff Ritzman.
That's right, me, from a cell phone.
In your truck.
Actually, in my dark room.
So what happened? You have an electrical storm, no power, and
yeah, just kind of the local neighborhood's knocked out for a little bit, I guess. So, hell of a thunderstorm, yes.
And Tyler said he had the same one.
Yeah.
Yes, a thunderstorm knocked you out. That's a good sign.
That's great.
You're all ready for the apocalypse.
That's right.
So, we were just talking about the UFO Congress and his perception of some of the stuff he saw. And one of the things I want to ask you, Tyler, is did you get to see whatever the presentation was on the Zimbabwe case that John Mack went over to Zimbabwe and investigated with the school children?
I did not. I went in only for Saturday morning, and then we had to shoot out of there. So I got to see Whitley Strieber and who's the guy that does the TV show? He did
Bryce Zabel.
Yeah, he was talking about the memes. I think that get into the culture, and that was it. Those are all the formal presentations that I saw.
Okay, Jeff, I'm trying to get somebody from Mac's camp to come on the show and talk about the Zimbabwe thing, because the more I look at the YouTube footage of that, the more amazing that case is. And apparently some people went back and interviewed them as adults, because I think that happened in 94.
Right.
Where something like 62 or 64 kids all were out at recess, and they ran back inside after encountering this being in this UFO who basically told them, tell your parents to stop screwing up the world. You're going to go to hell in a handbasket here, kids.
Yeah.
But there was a lot of subtle things that now, having done Paratopia, I pick up on. Like at one point, John Mack asks this little boy, so, the little boy says the sound scared him. He said he was scared. Max says, what scared you? He says the sound. He says, well, what sort of sound was it? Was it like a boom? Was it a hum? Was it a whistle? What did it sound like? And he said, it sounded like somebody playing the flute.
Yeah.
And I think to myself, wow, that's right there with the shamanism, the DMT, the trickster, all of that type of stuff is all wrapped up in that one little kid's innocent fear, and it's also Krishna, the little boy playing the flute.
Right.
So there's something there that I think that we need to explore. And Tyler, I'll send you links if you don't know what we're talking about.
Yeah, I'd like to look at that. If you think about it, though, if I said to you, tell me about a sound, would you have come up with a flute?
No.
You know what I mean? I mean, it's just so striking that's the story. It's so interesting that would come out there.
Well, that's it. And then it's all these little kids, and I mean, they clearly were scared by what they saw, and they describe what they saw. And to me, that's really compelling. And I think that was the thing that bothered me about Robert Schaefer and got me on his case on his blog, was the fact that he had gone down this list of stuff that he'd seen, various people that are frauds and whatever. And then when he got to this, he just said, so it's a bunch of kids, talking about what they saw. Ask me what I make of it. I don't know. Maybe somebody hoaxed them. So it's like it can't even enter his mind frame that, well, maybe one option is that they saw what they said they saw. Like that's never, and yet he's calling himself an investigator. That's the part that really bothers me. And the thing, the sort of meta bother of that is the fact that I'm an experiencer. And so I know, once again, I'm confronted with being a house slave in a way. It's like, it doesn't matter what I do. It doesn't matter how many David Jacobs we expose or go after hypnosis. At the end of the day, because I'm an experiencer, I'm dirt to him. Even though I'm probably actually more rational about this stuff because I don't have a belief system that excludes plausibility.
Well, I can't impute, his thoughts about are you dirt or not. I hope not, and I suspect, based on his answer to you, that the answer to that is definitely not.
Well, he hasn't answered me, has he?
I thought I saw it, and maybe I read somebody else's.
Two people responded to me. I'm not sure if he did. Maybe he did, and I haven't read it yet.
Yeah, look. Don't look at the bottom. He's fixed it now, so you can reply to the actual poster.
Oh, okay.
I didn't pick up on, but I thought he had a nice response to you, unless I'm mistaken. I hope I read this right.
Yeah, maybe you didn't. I haven't seen it yet.
And I think, honestly, the first thing that comes to my mind is somebody who's kind of maybe looked at some of the psychology is the McMartin effect. If you remember that situation, I think in Minnesota, quite a few years back, where there were claims of satanic sexual abuse, mass quantities in a preschool, nursery school setting, that ultimately the case collapsed. And these kids were being led, and they were, kids will fantasize, they will confabulate, they'll tell stories. That's the nature of children sometimes. And everybody goes, yeah, see, that's it. You can't trust a kid. And I think everything else gets dismissed as a consequence. I don't know if that's where he was coming from, but I could see that. Okay. This whole thing got me thinking about kind of my history too, that we talked about a little bit. So, it could just be we all get tarred with the same brush, and seen it before. And I know what it is, and that doesn't make it right. In fact, it makes it the opposite of right.
Jeff, I see you just came on Skype. Do you want to go on Skype?
I have power.
Whoa!
All right.
Yeah.
All right.
I do.
Then we'll be right back after these messages with Jeff in a real voice.
Bye.
Hi, this is Ted Phillips, and you're listening to Paratopia.
Well, Paratopia, we are back, and Jeff Ritzman sounds like his old self again. Gus, the power's back up, yeah?
The power is on, yes, sir.
Sweet. Well, let me ask Tyler this as it applies to you. Some weeks back, somebody had asked Jeff why, what's he doing to examine his visitor or whatever, shrouded man comes in, and is he doing anything to gather genetic materials? And he said, yes, in fact, you had sent him a kit to do this. But as we're talking about the Illumina scanner, and this other, whatever these guys at this conference are doing to figure out what, alien and angelic DNA is all about, we're sort of treating it seriously, but are we? I mean, we're not really. We don't really expect these things to pan out in ufology. Is that the same way that you're giving Jeff that kit? Do you really expect him to get anything? Do you really hope that he will? Or is it not even about that?
If the opportunity presents itself and he could get a great sample, you would have something you could look at. The question I would say is, what has Jeff claimed? Okay, I'm not trying to put words in your mouth, Jeff, but the tools and the questions that I ask are based on the claims of the specific claims of the people. So we're talking about a nefarious conspiracy against all humanity, hybrid aliens, fine. Then I should be able to, or someone should be able to come up with positive proof of the existence of hybrid DNA. When extraordinary claims are made, you need the evidence to back those up. And in this particular instance, it is not clear to me, and Jeff can pile in here, whether we've discovered if this is even a physical entity. And
right.
There have been no claims about what sort of DNA it has, where the Shroud Man derives from, nothing like that. So I'd say, yes, we can try to sample the room for DNA, and in fact, we'll find it. We'll find Jeff's DNA, his wife's DNA, the dog, everything, and be no further along in understanding than we were at the outset. If other revelations come to pass, we come to know other things, Jeff comes to know other things, and he gets a sample, then maybe it will be important. But Jeff can safeguard that sample for a long time and analyze it when and if the time comes that it would tell us something.
If the DNA is, say, on the rug, I mean, if it's that this guy sits down with Jeff in the living room rug where everybody walks and the dog walks and all of that, is that going to be impossible to get a reading off of?
Yes. If in fact we think it's just regular DNA, we'll find regular DNA. We need something that's a little bit different here. And that's why, for David Jacobs, for example, an admixture of human and alien from God knows where would stand out. We may or may not have that here. But if at some point there's something conveyed to Jeff that suggests that, oh yeah, you know what, we're going to find a weird type of selenium incorporated in here, that can be looked for.
Is there any, I don't know, surface, let's say, that's easier to acquire DNA from than another?
Oh yeah, I would rather have something fairly hard, like a wall, a painted wall, for example, where even maybe you might be able to make out a fingerprint, the oil from that. A fiber, a surface like carpet, I think that would be nightmarish. It's seriously very difficult. And so we could all spend an awful lot of time, energy, and money searching for something that gets us nowhere fast. So this is where, if something presents itself, he's ready. And if that happens, great. And if not, great.
Well, how much will this cost you to analyze if he sends you something?
Depends on what you do. If we try to do a whole genome sort of project with that, the physicality of the sample render that absolutely impossible. We don't have enough sample to do a whole genome. Doing profiles, we didn't talk about the FBI base, but there's a database called CODIS, where they have samples that they take blood samples and then a cheek swab for verification purposes. And those can be profiled markers so they can identify people. I think they use 13 short tandem repeat markers, standard. They're going to try to expand, I think, to 23, because as the database grows, they're having too many instances of false positives, false matches that aren't really real. But anyway, you can fingerprint it. And if this is something not of this earth, that fingerprint's going to be pretty unique. Or if it's an animal, for example, total animal, we might be able to match it with mitochondrial barcode from something else. But you are limited by the sample. You literally are.
Well, this is interesting because this might not just apply to ufology, but even to ghost research, where they see an apparition or an orb or something pass through a wall. Is that something where they could take a scraping off a wall and get that analyzed? Would that result in anything?
It would depend on what you think the orb contains, for example. So if you had a hypothesis like, that's my grandmother, and that orb has DNA in it from my grandmother, then maybe that would be approachable. Because what you would find is, in principle, if you're related, you should see, if you're a grandchild, 25% or so of your markers should be shared in the orb.
Well, I don't think anyone's thinking that their, grandma's DNA is going to be in an orb of light, though. I don't think that's realistic.
Yeah, I mean, you have to use the right tool for the job. And my questions depend very much on what the claims are. And so for the situation with Jeff, there are some practical limitations. And indeed, you'd have to be sympathetic with David Jacobs when you talk about getting forensic samples. We're really talking about what's practical is profiling, just as we're talking here. With David Jacobs, you have a chance of finding something really, in principle, unique. We don't know what's going on with Shroud Man. And,
or he could just have Elizabeth turn on the webcam every time they use the computer.
There you go.
One of the two. Well, Jeff, how seriously do you take being able to get a DNA sample from any of your experiences? I mean, I know you've got the kit and I know you're ready to do it, but do you really expect to find anything?
It would be great. It'd be great if it did. Yeah. I mean, here's the thing that no one seems to quite get their head around is that it's the last thing on your mind. at the time. I've just been, I guess the past couple of weeks, I've been thinking a lot about, how could I do this? Is there something I could set down? Is there something that I could set up beforehand to remind me or to kind of jar me out of it? But the thing that I keep going back to is the very first time that this guy showed up. He walked out the front door. He wouldn't open it. If you'll remember, Jeremy, I had to open the door, both of them, and let him out. And then he walked down the steps and right hand turned down the street. So I don't know, and I can't remember for the life of me. It doesn't seem to me that I remember him ever touching anything or ever picking anything up.
He went through a wall once, did he not?
Yes. And that was the question I was going to ask was, Tyler, not only with him in the spot where the wall, obviously, he went through the wall, so it would stand to reason that there might be something there. But what about I see a light here every now and then that's usually roundabout in the same area of the ceiling. And it's just below the ceiling. It's not on it. It's not a reflected light, clearly. Is it worth taking some kind of bit sample of the wall or the paint on the wall? Would that tell anyone anything? If there is some kind of change in that, would it be detectable?
I'm having a hard time imagining something that would be easily figured out.
Okay.
So I don't know. I mean, Kim Cooper has a brother who's a physicist, and I can ask him. I think he's a physicist.
Okay.
And he has one who works for Abbott Labs.
That's right off the top of my head, there's the two instances that I think about is the light kind of showing up in that same spot, and of course he's I don't know that he's always come out of dark corners of the room, but he tends to kind of show up there unexpectedly when you're not looking. So I don't know exactly where he comes from, but I know the first time that he was here, he exited through the front door, and if I remember correctly, it was like went to the door and he's leaving, and he's like, "Do you mind?" And I opened the door, and so there seemed to be like a concerted effort. Now that I think about it, not to touch anything.
Yeah.
I have touched the garment that he wears. I have held that in my hands. But again, that's not really clean enough to do anything with, unless I could say, "Hey, do you mind if I grab a pair of scissors real quick?" Or can you open your mouth and let me stick this in just for a second? Like that kind of mental, capacity is not present for that. It's just like that's not there.
Yes, I understand. So perhaps our enemies will not. Okay, I get it. Yeah. And you do what you can do, and if the opportunity presents itself, you're ready. You're ready. Yeah. But could you make up a stranger story? All these things, they're just so fascinating because the guy comes through a wall, but he wants you to open the door.
Right. Exactly.
It's just so interesting. Nobody would make this up. It's the bizarre aspect of it.
Yeah. I mean, it's always been that. There is one case that comes to mind here, and we might want to pursue this in a formal way with you, Tyler. Is that back in the heyday of the Gulf Breeze case, Ed Walters was at Shoreline Park. And essentially he was accosted by these creatures that he had seen before, associated with the Gulf Breeze UFO. And when he basically came out of this experience, he had a black substance that was underneath of his fingernails that, if I remember correctly, and everybody's free to correct me because I always reserve the right to be wrong, this stuff smelled bad, and it was collected and analyzed. And what came out of that analysis of this material that was underneath of his fingernails was that whatever sort of life form that it was silica based.
Whoa.
What does that say to you, Tyler?
Absolutely not of this earth.
Oh, okay.
And totally not known.
Okay.
And so often I say this, instant Nobel Prize for anyone who could demonstrate that.
Okay.
I mean, it's phenomenal. It's phenomenal if true.
Okay. Yeah. Well, yeah, that's the marker. I guess I could try and contact Dr. Maccabee and ask him about that. I'm sure he would know more. Lee and I used to talk about that a long time ago, a lot, and thinking about, is there any samples left? How much did they get? Is there any still around? Is it too far degraded to do anything with at this point? I don't know where it is, and I don't know how much was collected. But I mean, I guess the premise of this was that in scuffling with these things, this is the byproduct of him scraping them away or pushing them off or whatever. This is what was gotten from underneath his fingernails. To my mind, that's the only case that's really had, really substantial stuff with people that I know. Like, I don't know anything about this hair of the alien case, which Jeremy knows more about than I do.
Bill Schalker did some work on that.
Bill Chalker, I think, was the one that I wrote to, and I asked him, who are these physicists, that have made these statements about this sample? And you get much the same reaction or response, rather, that you would get just about from anybody in this field, is that, well, they don't want to come forward, or yes, they are anonymous, or something like that. I remember I asked the question, who are these people? And it wasn't answered again. Only just, sending more reams of, he sent me some documents, I think, or some files that were the makeup of this stuff. Like, it was like a lab report, but there was no lab report header or that I remember. I'd have to go back and look at my emails, but ultimately my question went unanswered. Who are these physicists? Who, this team, who are they? And that didn't get answered. Will this golf breeze thing be any different? I honestly don't know. I don't know how much of it exists, but I do remember vividly, Lee coming over one day and saying, well, it's silica.
Wow.
I was like, wow, okay.
Wow.
I
think there's certainly no harm in asking.
Mm-hmm.
But the other thing that you guys are doing that actually is important, whether you fail here and don't get anything, what you're doing is you're establishing the idea in people, oh, I should look out for this. And one day, somewhere, somehow, somebody might get a sample, that somebody could really analyze. So the education aspect that you guys do, I say, is important, whether or not you're garnering the samples or the knowledge you want at the moment. You're establishing, future protocols. People interested and knowledgeable about how to proceed.
Well, I mean, the question for me comes up as much as it did many years ago when we were running or facilitating a run of a experiencer support group. I actually had a core amount of people in that group that were interested in trying to collect forensic data from their experiences. And we went through the sterilization of baby food jars, and we went through all of this stuff of trying to collect these things as sterile and as carefully as possible. And the question came up from one guy in the group. He said, what happens if we get something and there's nothing alien about it, that it turns out that it's not a differential in any other way other than it's someone who doesn't live in the house, but yes, there's a difference in the materials that you get. In other words, it's not from the wife, the kid, the dog, or the brother. It's someone else. Of which, how do you determine the worth of this? There has to be some determining factor in saying this is genuinely strange.
Yes.
And dealing with an unknown like this, are we going to find something, or would you expect to find something that is genuinely strange? Let's put aside the hybrid crap for a minute. I mean, just in the nature of, like me, I'd like say I go to this guy in the black outfit and I say, open up your mouth. And I get a swipe and I stick it in the jar and I send it to you. And it turns out to be like no different than any other man that you would swab his cheek with. What do we do at that point? Is there anywhere else you can go? Is there any other place that you can look or stone you can turn?
No, not at that point. If we did the profile and it was the same.
Mm-hmm.
But I would point out to you that at that stage, you've established that you got a sample from this entity.
Right.
Okay? That it's a physical entity, that it came out of his mouth, and we saw the DNA profile there. You'll have to be, if it's something really, really unusual and abnormal, you're really lucky. You're really lucky. And you can hang your hat on that. That would be the positive bit of data that's definitive or really leading to a new conclusion. But you're lucky. And so it might be a process of tightening the noose, process of eliminating and, moving towards what's more likely, moving away from what's less likely, a long haul. And you build a case, much as you might do, like the district attorney might do against in a criminal case. You build a case. So, you'd be so lucky if you got something definitive. But I'm telling you, 99% of the time in science, that isn't how it goes either. You just build data. You pile it on. Keep going.
Well, going back to the golf breeze case here for a minute, silica. Explain silica for me.
Well, there are people that hypothesize that carbon is a very useful molecule to build things, to build complex molecules like proteins, because it can bond in so many ways, and it has a lot of latitude in that. Underneath it in the periodic table is silicon. And so as you look at the columns in the periodic table, they line up with similar properties. And it really relates to their outer electron orbitals as to how they bond. So silica has, it's thought by some, capacities that are similar to carbon for building things. And so it's been hypothesized that there might be a silicon-based life, not a carbon-based life, but it could be very similar in many other ways, and something that we might recognize pretty easily as life. Now, other people, Norman Pace from, I think, Indiana University at the time, have written that, no, you know what, life is pretty much going to be the biochemistry that we see, and DNA is going to be the master molecule wherever you are. I don't agree with that, because I think that our experience is very limited and our imaginations are equally limited. So I can't buy Pace's argument, but not everybody agrees that silicone will work. Okay, but anyway, it's a thought. And if you found, oh my God, I was telling Jeremy I was so close to the Nobel this weekend. Yeah, come on, get me there, man. Just please. Okay. Get me one. Just
I'll try.
one.
I'll try. The thing that I think I walked away from back in the day about Lee, I'm trying to remember exactly how I tripped across this, but is silica is that also found in sand?
Yes. Yeah, quartz.
Okay.
Sand's one of the most abundant molecules. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Now, see, I think that was my tripping point with this. Now that I'm thinking about it, is because, of course, Gulf Breeze is a beach community, and Shoreline Park is on a beach. I mean, it might as well be like not so much like an oceanfront beach, but it's kind of like a little inlet pass that goes by, and you've got sand, of course, coming out from the woods. You've got a big finger of woods, essentially, that goes out along the edge of it's kind of a weird spot, because you've got trees and you've got picnic tables, and then you've got like a little bit of shoreline, and then you look across and you can see Gulf Breeze. This is from across the bridge, and I'm thinking to myself, at the time, I remember looking up silica and seeing silica quartz, and that being consistent with sand. I think that's where I had left it, because I said, couldn't that just as easily have been sand? Especially the product of it smelling bad, which was also what kind of tipped me off. I'm like, okay, what did it smell like? Well, nobody said, but try leaving packed sand underneath your fingernails for a day, or even a matter of hours, and the your fish slime and all of that's contained in seawater is going to really get quite ripe under your nails. So could that be it? I mean,
well, we could always say, sure, it could be, but I think, you've got some good forensic skills going here. And you know what the ocean smells like? when the tide goes out.
Right.
You get that sulfury, rotten smell.
Mm-hmm.
So think about the bacteria and such that live on the surface of the water. If you get them underneath your fingernails and the oxygen gets depleted, the sulfate-reducing bacteria will begin to produce these really smelly compounds like hydrogen sulfide, rotten eggs.
Right.
And it stinks. It can stink, just plain stink.
Yeah.
But the silica that would be polymerized in a living form would not be silica dioxide. It would be polymers of basically of silicon molecules like proteins. And so if you think about carbon dioxide, carbon, that's the main molecule is carbon, but it's not oxidized. It's hooked carbon to carbon and carbon to other entities like nitrogen and things to make proteins. So if it's a silicone-based life form, you will not confuse it with sand. But if you did like a general analysis and just put it in a mass spec, for example, SiO2, silica dioxide. Yeah, there you go.
Gotcha. Okay. Well, I'll have to do a little homework and get back to you on that to find out where that is, who did it, and more details about it. Because honestly, I it's been so many years ago, I can't even remember anymore about that. And that was another case that that had its every bit of its marginal points to it. It's definitely got its anti-structural points to it. And for my money, I mean, judging by what I've been told recently that goes on there, the activity down there ceased when people stopped going out to Shoreline Park and waiting for it. So it's definitely got a weird air about it. It's got a funny smell, pardon the pun, but it's just one of those cases that always kind of intrigued me in that way, because there was also a sample gathered when the craft got very low to the ground, and I'm only drawing this from memory. I have no book in front of me. Ed, I believe his property backed up to a school, and this thing came down very low. It left I guess, bleached grass behind as it got low to the ground. If you look at the photographs of this thing, you'll see that there is what looks like an energy source inside the bottom of this craft. There's a very large power ring, they call it, and inside of that ring, you see what looks like a swirling plasma type effect inside. And this is going off still photos and whatnot. But he said that it ejected some liquid, and that he collected this liquid in, I guess, a jar of some kind off the ground. It was said when it was given to someone to analyze, it was bubbling, but it was not hot. It did turn out to be seawater.
Huh.
Again, I couldn't name off the top of my head who it was taken to, how many times it changed hands before it got to somebody to analyze, but I do know it came back as seawater. And so why seawater would be bubbling like that for quite a while, as if I'm remembering correctly, I have no answer for that. But there were a couple of things collected on that case that there should be some paperwork for. There should be some record of somewhere that we might be able to track down. And if we can, I'll certainly do my best to find those out.
Well, that reminds me of a case that occurred in Council Bluffs, Iowa, in around 1976 or 77. And there was a sighting, and they saw a liquid. And I think it was a molten metal, and that was collected.
Yes.
And I think actually analyzed by a company, I remember the name because I worked with them when I was working at the University of Nebraska on some other projects, a Griffith Pipe Company. And they did some metallurgic analysis. And but it was the thing ran like liquid solder, of all things. And that sighting has never. I mean, there's the story. It's never been explained.
Okay.
The idea of the ring or the residue, that reminds me of some work that Ted Phillips did.
Yeah.
So he might be someone you touch bases with and kick ideas around, because he's been a good source for me and very helpful. He's such a nice guy.
Oh, yeah, he's a wonderful guy. Yeah, I mean, Maccabee was pretty tightly associated with Gulf Breeze, at least in the optical sense of analyzing the photographs and the films that came out of there from Ed Walters and other people. But there was It's possible. I don't actually know the road name, but there's a very famous shot from that case called the road shot, where this thing is literally down over top of the road, and it's been misanalyzed a billion times, and finally through using the Polaroid, technology, they've found out essentially at the end of this thing that the reflection seen on the road was not a reflection, but a pile of some sort of substance that was dissipating like dry ice.
Oh.
And so you can clearly see that it's conical underneath, and you can, when you zoom into this this photo, and what they did to do this was they removed layers of an emulsion and enhanced each layer and then recomposited together. And they got quite a bit of detail. I mean, I've held the original photographs in my hands, at least a couple of them, and I got to say, for my money, they're bad. They're just bad photographs. When you see the process that they did on them to get them to what the public actually sees, it's nothing short of a miracle to be able to look down into emulsion and gather data out of that very thick emulsion that's on those pull-apart Polaroid types.
Yeah.
Nonetheless, I mean, if there was some kind of chemical reaction happening on that road, as I remember when I went down there, that spot was marked. I have to wonder if there wouldn't be something done to the concrete. I mean, it's possible. Who knows? I mean, that's been a very long time ago now. But I always wonder when I hear a light going through a wall or a being going through a wall, like, what do you even do with that? If there's a mark, you can say there's a burn mark there, or there's the wall is warped or something, indicating heat or something has happened there. But in a lot of cases, you don't get that. There's no disturbance to anything.
Yeah.
And so I don't know if the road down there would be worth trying to get a piece of to look at to see if it's any different than any place else. And this is just taking a page from like the crop circle research people. They take stuff from inside of a formation. They take stuff from outside the formation as a control sample. They run their analysis and they find out it's different in some cases. But I wouldn't know the first thing about how do you analyze a piece of paint. I mean, I don't even know who I'd take that to. So unless something makes a mark, it's going to be difficult to tell.
Yeah. Yeah. It's funny you mentioned dry ice, because when you're talking about the bubbly water that wasn't hot, the first thing I thought of is it was effervescing, and carbon dioxide was coming out of it. But I don't know if there's any connection there, but if in fact you've gotten the water supersaturated with carbon, like a beverage, the pH will go down. And so maybe it could have discolored something. Perhaps somebody noticed that and took a picture. I think now at this date, if you went back to the road, probably very little hope you'd have anything left. You know, from the sun and the weathering process. You know, the sun's intense in Florida.
Right. Well, you would think that if there was some kind of breakdown or decomposition of that road, that it would long have been replaced and probably would have cracked apart and whatnot.
Yeah.
If it's unfazed, then I would guess the chances are slim that there's anything there. I don't know whatever happened to soil samples taken from the school where this thing nearly landed. That I don't know, and Ted probably might know something about that, but I can check that out as well. But those two instances for Gulf breeze for me are the ones that stick out as being like there was something collected, but again, like most of these cases, you get a little bit and then there's no follow up.
Yeah,
this was always my problem in watching shows like Sightings, and I love Sightings because I worked for them for a while, but they never followed up on stuff quite as good as they should have, and you never got the outcome of this is under analysis, but what happened? Very little follow up, and but oftentimes I find that's not so out of the realm when it comes to UFO stuff. I mean, it just isn't. It just is the way it is. It seems.
Exactly, and that's how you have to approach it. I've had conversations with people in MUFON about trace evidence, and it is one of the most difficult things. You know, you're hoping beyond hope that you'll find something truly phenomenal, but in actual fact, it's unlikely. Do you guys remember Ted Ackworth, from the UFO Hunters, Dr. Ted Ackworth.
Yes.
And he had somewhere, I can't remember if it was on the show or he had written it somewhere, but he talked about trace evidence, and he had a really, really good way of putting it. And that was that he's talking about you're hoping that you find a compound called unknownium.
Right.
And there is no such thing. And so you're dealing with probabilities, possibilities, but no, very rarely anything that's a hard case that you can close at that point and say, got it. And that's
Right.
the frustration of it.
Yeah. Well, I think what I found back in the old days was that people had very little knowledge about, number one, where to go. But if they did find a place that would, they would call them and say, I've collected this, I need to know what its composition is, if there's anything unusual about it. When they would find somewhere that they could take this, there was no money.
Yeah.
There was no money to dump into. And I think even back in, the late 80s, early 90s, you were talking about $1,000 or more to really get something done. And there was no funding. And as George Hansen said on the program way back when, the skeptic organizations have more money in pocket than do any paranormal, investigation group to be able to put forth the cash to get these things analyzed. I think that oftentimes that's where things come to a screeching halt. What do you do then? You just sit on it, and then it degrades, and then it becomes useless, I would assume, after a certain point. The fund for UFO research, I don't know how they would handle something like that. Would they fund something to be looked at? Again, I don't know. But to me, there should be some kind of fund set up somewhere, that offers that kind of thing to a qualified sample and a person whose story checks out as thoroughly as can be. Couldn't there be some kind of funding outfit where people just donate, and when something comes up, boom, we've got $1,000 in hand to go to a lab and say, tell us what this is.
Well, that's already 1,000 steps ahead of MUFON. I don't think I've told you this, Jeff, and I know I haven't told you this, Tyler, but I was talking to Ted Rowe of NARCAP recently, and we've been asking on the show. We've asked this a couple of times. What does MUFON do with their UFO case data? Do they make any analysis on it or any of that? And he was talking to one of the higher ups there. I won't name the person because he might be leaving soon in distress. But he basically said, not basically, he out and out told Ted, we don't do anything with it. We've never done anything with it. Because Ted had asked him, what do you do with this stuff? And the answer is nothing. And the interesting thing is now NARCAP, they did their spherical UAP report. And basically what they had found is that the instances of an airplane going haywire in the presence of a UAP or a UFO is always, with the exception of one case, and I think that was a fighter chasing after a UAP, but is always a case of a spherical UAP. So if it's a ball of light, essentially, if that approaches the plane, odds are the plane's going to go haywire for the amount of time that thing is there, and then the systems go back to normal. So there, you've got an example of what you could do. You could say, okay, what are the shapes associated with certain types of encounters? And so you can pretty much say, well, these balls of light create turbulence with the gears of an airplane or with the the panel of an airplane, whereas other UAP don't do that. So that's interesting, right? But I mean, my point is, what you're suggesting is like light years ahead of even that. So these groups aren't even at, MUFON, which has been around forever, isn't even at the point of just looking at what do these basic shapes mean? Anything? So good luck.
Well, I mean, that's been my experience, is that they don't do anything with what they've got. And what's even more unfortunate is if you're an outside investigator that's not involved with that group, even trying to get at data. In other words, even trying to find something out about your local area. Can you send me what's been cited, in Boulder, Colorado, the past 3.5 years? That should be pretty easy, but you won't get it. That's at least been my experience. And I don't know that being a member would have had anything to do with it, because I asked a member and even they couldn't get at it. I mean, it just seems to me that if we're all fired up to get some kind of analysis done, and there's enough people interested in this, then kick in $5 into an account somewhere that somebody could set up, and then that's where it ends. I mean, you've got the funds to do it. I don't know how you would set that up, and I don't know who would be in the driver's seat of that to decide what case is worthy. See, this is where it gets sticky, and this is where it wouldn't surprise me if this idea had come up before, but this is where it gets sticky, is because some people's idea of qualified is far different than would be my own. And that's where the infighting starts. And that's, again, this is where this all falls apart, because no one can agree on what determines an anomalous event and what also determines the collection of an anomalous sample. That's problematic right there. How do you decide what's worthy to drop a dime on? That would be tricky. But here's another thing that just popped in my head, Tyler. I think back I think Ted's only been on the show once, if I remember right.
Maybe twice.
Yeah, we tried to get him back again, but he's not been well. And
I'm sorry, I thought I meant Ted Rowe.
No, I mean Ted Phillips. I know Ted Phillips has not been well, but we're going to try to get him back on soon. But he had a case where, and I believe this was at Marley Woods, where a ball of light came into contact with the hood of a car and left behind a dust-like material. And they collected some of this off the hood of the car. And he didn't say this on the air, but I don't think it's bad for me to say it on air, that they found that it contained elements of the swamp water which was nearby, but it also contained, moreover than that, carrots. The same makeup as carrots. Which I laughed at, because I said, well, what eats carrots? Rabbits. And who's going down the rabbit hole? But I mean, again, we're looking for something anomalous and we come up with carrots. And so something like that, I hear that. And let me tell you this is how my mind works. I hear carrots, and all I can think of, the first words that comes to mind is, you sardonic motherfuckers. You're going to dangle the carrot. Now you're going to give me carrot dust. That's what comes to mind for me, because it's exactly how it works. That is exactly how it works. It's the dangling carrot everybody talks about. We're all chasing this, pie in the sky that you're never going to get a bite of. So I don't know. I mean, again, you've got something anomalous, contact with a hood, you scrape it off. What do you got? You got carrots and swamp water. Tells us what?
Did they mention by carrot? Did they mean that they found the long chain saturated and unsaturated molecule, kind of a fatty molecule like beta carotene?
Barricade. That's what I was thinking about. Yeah, I don't know. Ted basically just kind of chuckled and said carrots, and I was like,
well, I mean, if you have those things, they are pigmented. That's the orange part of the carrot. Maybe if that light was orange, that not necessarily from a carrot as much as a compound that would.
Could it have been from an orange?
We'd be talking citric acid, among other things. But yeah, I mean, my gosh, that's strange and interesting, and
yeah. And it's tongue in cheek, and it's sardonic, and it's all of the things that, at least in my experience, this thing shows, is that kind of that kind of shoulder shrugging, like, well, there it is. What are you going to do with that? Yeah.
Well, and again, isn't that like the kids in Zimbabwe hearing a flute, and who plays a flute? Basically, like the Pied Piper gathering the kids.
Right, exactly.
Message.
It's exactly right. Yeah, I mean, it's all very folklorish, and it's all very filled with metaphor, which is just what's so damn strange about it. But earlier, Jeremy, you had mentioned that the guy apparently you were interacting with online like had no use for you because you're an experiencer. And I might say that, the way he shrugged that case off, if in fact that's how he did, was, to shrug off that case and say, well, the flute thing, that's just some kids and blah, blah, blah. We all have to realize that the elephant in the room here is that these people are looking for a nut and a bolt. And if you're not in that camp, then a flute doesn't make any sense to you. We're looking for a hum or a vibration or scraping metal sounds or something like that. That's what we're looking for out of a machine. A flute is not what your lawnmower sounds like when it starts up, and so that doesn't make any sense to them, and so they discard it out of hand. That's just the way it works. And so if you were to get a sample of something weird, like, I mean, just say, for instance, you get what could you get? How about a flower that doesn't exist anywhere in Pennsylvania and you live in Scranton, and you get a flower that doesn't grow but once every 5 years in Antarctica? Okay, that would be really weird. How would you have gotten that? Where would it have come from? You don't know anyone in the Arctic Circle, but it's not from somewhere else. It's from here. I wonder how something like that would be received by this community. Would they shrug that off and say, well that's stupid?
Why don't we ask Tyler? Tyler.
Yeah.
Because, Jeff, you missed the beginning of this program. I mean, Tyler was basically saying that he used to be one of those type of brush them off skeptics. So my question is for Dr. Kokjohn. So if you are sticking with materialism and that sort of thing, does this avenue of inquiry even appeal to you?
It would fall into the category of, that's very strange. And how far can you take it? So you come back and it's a very compelling story. And you go back and say, I can't explain that. And then we have to look for others where we constantly see similar things. But,
well, then here's the bigger question. Do you think that at the end of the day, this thing is something that science will have an answer to and we're just grasping at straws because we can't answer it now? Or do you think it will fall out of the parameters of science, and so there might be a piece of it that applies, but ultimately the rest of it falls outside the realm?
It may fall outside the realm of things we can do something about now. And I think somewhere we had talked about the idea.
Is there another part of you other than a scientist? I mean, because this is what I'm trying to get out of the skeptics is they're saying, well, science can say this and that and the other thing. Well, but is there a piece that is beyond science, or will that always sound silly and illogical because you're a scientist?
No, there are things that science cannot answer and that we don't have the tools. If you think about it, not too long ago, really not that long ago, if you'd ask how does a cell transmit information from one generation to the next, we didn't even know DNA was central. And we had a big argument about it. And some guys that actually proved it in 1944 had to go to unbelievable lengths to basically, argue against their own conclusions because they couldn't absolutely nail it down. But as technology develops, as sequencing technology develops, there are things that you can do and approach. And so bit by bit, you may get a mosaic picture. But no, there are things that are beyond us and are beyond our understanding. Consciousness, we talked about with the NDEs, what a hard problem it is to understand how the brain is conscious of itself. And even if you're a hardcore materialist, I can't point to the spot, from which all consciousness springs or where it's integrated.
But you are a materialist, and so you must believe that you will find that at some point because it comes from the brain, right?
I believe that we can approach it. I can't say we will definitely have it because some of these problems are pretty hard. Okay, and if you want to think of a really tough one, not vitalism, but how about the origins of life? I mean, it's there's a hard one to figure out. And I think right now it is beyond us. It simply evades us.
Have you heard any scientific answer to the origin of the universe that makes sense to you? Like, I wonder how it makes sense that something comes from nothing unless that nothingness, if you're going to say that there's, the thing that I say in my book, of course, is if you are going to say that there is nothingness and nothing is a concept, that means you have intelligence, because a concept we believe exists in intelligence, but this would be a concept that exists prior to the brain. So therefore, this concept is intelligence itself. And so all of the physical stuff that comes from this intelligence is embedded in it. And therefore, consciousness does come before the physical. Do you think don't you think that is, I don't know, a more valid supposition than just, yeah, shit comes from nothing and that's the
end? With science, you're always allowed to say, I don't think your hypothesis is right. And so I look at it and I'm amazed at what some of the super brains like Stephen Hawking and these guys, Lawrence Krauss, who's right here in Arizona, have been able to accomplish and what they can do. But I just come back and say, yeah, so what happened 1 second before the Big Bang? And then kindly explain to me why you have all the matter in the universe condensed into a singularity and suddenly it explodes. And space-time expands. More to the point, space-time can expand faster than the speed of light. Okay, I think we have some issues here. I'm just stupid. I don't get it. And that's where it stands for me. I just don't have a big enough brain to get that.
But do you think that science will be able to answer? I guess this is what I'm trying to nail down. Are there things that fall outside of science permanently, or do they just fall outside of it because we haven't figured it out with science yet?
Well, we would always hold out the rational hope that nothing is beyond science. But I'm here to tell you that there are so many questions that science cannot answer. And one of them is like, should we use a nuclear weapon? We made it. Should we use it? Well, we did. Was it right? Well, can science help you there? That's a moral question. But what about the existence of God? Can you prove that? Or the universal consciousness, for example. I had a good time making fun of it, but boy, my gosh, I think that some of these things are just going to evade us for all time. What happens after we die? It's a problem that is beyond our ability to really cope with scientifically.
When we're talking about any kind of paranormal evidence gathering, I mean, especially as it pertains to the UFO thing, I think it's unfortunate that I have to say it this way, because this certainly gives the open door to a skeptic to exit the conversation with. But the very fact that with all of the man hours that we've put into this in 60 plus years, and everyone's contention that it's real, in quotes, that we don't have some kind of something at our feet or in our hands to study should speak a lot about what it means to try and gather data from this thing in the physical sense. And the very fact that, you're going to get plenty of hoaxes. That's always going to be a part of this. And I've grown to accept that. But the very fact that you have something that is perceived as real and can affect the environment, although it doesn't affect the environment in any way that is so profound that we can say this is a byproduct of the unknown interacting with the ground, let's say. The problem exists for me there is, if you could get a scraping off of a flying saucer with a file, and you went up and you scraped it into a vial, when the saucer gets up and leaves, would the filings leave as well?
Oh, good question.
And I think that we've always heard about missing samples and samples that have disappeared. And I think we always think that there's some nefarious government agent that's stealing the vials and replacing them with empty, sterile tubes. And I'll tell you, if I had to hedge a bet on this, I'd bet you that the actual sample cannot stay here in a physical sense, because these things can't stay here in a physical sense, and therefore trying to gather anything from it, you may get something, you may get the Holy Grail in your hand, but how long is it going to last is the big question. Yeah. That's it for me.
That's an excellent question. I can't come back and say, oh yeah, it's impossible for this stuff to disappear.
I mean,
I never thought of that.
It just goes to, how much of this is experiential and how much of it is ping a rock. I mean, can you ping a rock off of it? I don't know. It certainly seems to be. And I think there's something, and this is probably, I don't know if this is a question you can even answer, Tyler, but do we need to start looking at things with different tools in different ways rather than the typical mass spec or something like that? Like, can we do something different that might yield some reaction that maybe we didn't expect? And I don't even know what that would be. I don't even know where I'm going with that, other than to say, if you've got an object that is not particularly interesting, is there some other way to approach it to say, okay, well, there is this part of it that is profoundly changed, but this is not something that typically would be on the roster of things to do. I mean, is there any braking technology that's out there besides, I guess you mentioned something earlier on the show. Is there anything else that can be done to a physical sample? Maybe that's something, let's say it's a ground sample from a landing case, which Ted has thousands of samples of. Is there something else? Is there any new technology that's out there that might get at it a different way than what we've been doing for decades?
Well, first of all, I would say you are on the right track. And we need to have the royal we, the whole field, badly needs a new perspective. And you can sense the frustration. And I think part of the interesting behaviors you get from people, one against the other, is this frustration that 70 years plus after Roswell, we got no bolts in hand. Okay, we're just not getting anywhere. And that's what I say, you know what? Time for a new perspective. Let's brainstorm, maybe at these meetings, try something different. Mm-hmm. Is there a new technology out there? I don't know, but I'll just give you one off-the-wall idea that I conveyed to MUFON a few years ago. And you guys can laugh at it, and everybody can say, well, you're stupid, all right? They do that anyway. But one of the things I thought is that if people were walking around, entities are walking around, picking stuff up, with humans, we can follow, track, even identify people based on the bacteria that they harbor. It is possible. Mm-hmm. Someplace, somebody, some entity coming from someplace else, they might leave behind things that are not like us. And there is a protocol, metagenomics, where you can go ahead and siphon up everything in the area, lyse it, and account for every little bug that's there.
Jeez.
And you might, just a thought, you're sitting there thinking, my God, we're not getting anywhere. Let's try something new. So that's what I proposed, is one way to look at some of the evidence might be to see, could we somehow, if we got really lucky, culture a totally unknown bacterium. And in fact, that's actually easy on Earth because most of them aren't known. But could we find something that doesn't have the usual and customary structures of the things that we expect to find here? There are certain ribosomal structures that we expect to find. And maybe, something. I mean, my God, how long are we going to continue to circle in the same rut?
Yeah. Well, one thing that I think I had written down about a year ago, and I'm looking in this book in front of me that I just write random ideas in, a lot of experiencers talking about light coming in through the window. And, 20 years ago, I don't think this would have been a feasible thing, but we can do quite a lot of measuring with laser technology these days. And I have to wonder if there is some energy that is making this light that is capable of moving someone. Now, people often talk about floating through the wall or floating through an open window. Then that glass, I would think, being a fragile substance, it would have to have some kind of effect on that glass. And so would there be a measurable difference from something on the other side of the house, say, or say, any piece of glass that's comparable to what's in the window? You remove the glass and you run a laser through each piece of glass, is there difference in refraction of that laser from piece of glass to piece of glass, even in the most minute way? Because I know that lasers these days can measure that sort of thing. I mean, but again, what would that mean if it was? You know, is glass consistent enough in its manufacture to be able to do a test like that and measure the minutia of what could be different?
Yeah, the origin of the glass itself would be a problem, but you could then return to Jeremy's idea of what NARCAP had done, and that is correlative studies, looking at the data, the idea of Project Core. You know, can you find any kind of connective tissue between these phenomena?
Right.
You might get lucky. Many years ago, I had heard a story that lasers could be used to eavesdrop on people in buildings by aiming them with the glass and getting the reflection, and getting the impulses, the Doppler shifts. I can't remember but the impulses that come back to convert that into a sound wave. And they could just by hitting the glass with the laser and getting the return.
Interesting.
So, I mean, you know, there's all kinds of interesting possibilities, and that's the fun of the new technology. And I won't kid you guys that a lot of the science is utterly dependent on the new technology. So think about in Maryland, the Hubble Space Science Telescope Institute, and all the things that can be done, specifically because we had that telescope up there.
Sure.
That were just pie in the sky. And then, whoa, now we can do it.
Right.
So I live for those days when we have new toys.
Yeah, new toys would be good. Jared, you had something?
You're both stupid.
So,
sorry.
There we have it.
I was late. Yeah, I wanted to go back. Hey, why not circle back, since this started off being a discussion about DNA sequencing and David Jacobs. Jacobs' former, I believe he's retired now, right? Temple University, his former employer, they had, I don't know if they still do, a professor there who was one of the people who hypnotized kids dealing with the satanic ritual abuse stuff way back when, which turned out to be a bust. And then, of course, we have Jacobs, who hypnotizes people to bring out alien abduction stuff, which turns out to be a bust. Do you, as an educator, find it odd that Temple University, between those two, didn't put an end to the whole hypnosis thing among their faculty?
I don't. And the reason that I say that is because of this sort of doctrine or theme in academics of academic freedom. And that if, for example, you try to constrain a researcher and you say, well, those tools and techniques are not permitted, the university could end up on the wrong end of an academic freedom argument or battle. And so it really does not surprise me that you really do have to let people kind of do their own investigations and follow their own path. And that's partly to protect the inquiry thing, you know, the purity of the search for knowledge or whatever, that we don't want the authorities telling us what to do. So that doesn't surprise me. Now, that said, there are constraints and rules. Institutional review boards for research with human subjects, for example, and biosafety committees and other things that the investigators must hew to those rules and regulations. And so there are, in fact, constraints. It's not as if it's Katie bar the door, do whatever you damn well want. No way. But I, as an administrator, if I were in that position, I would be very loath to say, you can't do that, sir. I would really, really not want to be in that position.
Well, do you think that their response of telling Jacobs to stop using their forms and their letterhead in his dealings with clientele is appropriate, or do you think that there needed to be more?
We don't know what all transpired. I think that they're trying to make it very clear that they do not put their imprimatur of approval on any of this, that he's on his own. And that seems to me to be a reasonable thing to do to protect their interests. in terms of doing more, it's really a hard one to call. And I know that what I've heard with Emma, for example, gives me great pause. And I cannot rationalize it. I cannot understand it. I wait for Dr. Jacobs to explain it. And I think if there was a reasonable explanation, we would have heard it years ago. But what went on and when all the facts we hope were on the table and what was decided, we really don't know. There may have been other strictures leveled against him that we will never hear of. Just can't tell you.
Okay.
It's a really, really difficult position for the university, and it's a very difficult position for Emma. And the one that's the person I personally feel the sorriest for is Emma, because she didn't do anything wrong. And I think this is just me. This is my opinion, that she went in maybe looking for help and became, I guess, his next book subject. I don't know. I'm imputing a lot of things here that I guess are unfair. And
no, that's accurate. I mean, he was going to write a book about her.
So I just, anyway, difficult position all the way around. If I were the administrator, I would try to protect the interests of the school, and you'd have to also be cognizant of the rights of everyone involved, and that includes Emma. And it's a difficult situation. I don't have the wisdom to be in positions like that, so I can't tell you, okay, this is what they should have done. I just don't know.
Mm-hmm. Fair enough. Well, I guess my last question is, you had mentioned that your own peers sort of tolerate what you do. We often hear in this field people who feel as though their jobs have been threatened or who have actually lost jobs, and I've never experienced anything close to that. So do you feel that? Do you feel that is something that you need to worry about?
No, I do not. Not for the UFO work. I have been indirectly threatened for political views. And people have threatened that there would be repercussions on grant evaluations, believe it or not. And it had to do with a position on the Iraq War, which I personally did not support. And and I mentioned that at a meeting, and somebody came back and told the people I work with that he better shut up, or you're going to get in trouble on these grant applications. And my answer to that was simple. It's like, how the hell would I know? I don't get my damn grants funded anyway. So if you're going to punish somebody, you got to let them know they're being punished, right? So, hey, fire away. But it can happen.
So the job of the educator is to support the bottom line of the government military establishment? Is that what we've learned? Wow, we've come a long way since Berkeley.
It was, there were differences of opinion, as you're aware, when the war was launched. I hope this doesn't get you into trouble. And not everybody had the same opinion. And I was basically told that, you better be careful because when your grants come up for review, they're going to get you. And, okay, whatever. If that's how you want to operate. Now, what does that tell you about the objectivity of scientists? What does that tell you? Yeah. There's an image and there's reality. Okay? And we would like you to swallow the image, take the little pill. But in reality, things can be different, and scientists are people. And they have emotions, and they have rivalries, hatreds, okay? Boy, it can get ugly. If you think back to the Genome Project, let's steer it back to some real data. Craig Venter was an NIH scientist who saw a different way to do genomic sequencing. And he began to move in that direction. He wasn't satisfied, or I can't remember if he was not getting funding or whatever, but he began his own institute. And he pursued the genome in his own way. And I'm telling you, he came within a whisker of beating the official project. Craig Venter was dismissed as an idiot. and then with much less kinder terms. And I even saw those in writing. And they hated him. They hated him for his success and his insight, really. And this is how it can go.
So when you hear this in ufology about people who have had their jobs threatened or maybe lost over ufology, does that ring plausible to you or no?
It would really depend on what the person maintained. And to not to put too fine a point on it, as long as I uphold what most people would consider to be generally accepted scientific approaches, methods, interpretations, and whatnot, conduct myself as a respectable scientist would, no problem. But if you come out there and you start talking about the Zeta Reticulans are going to take over, and they took my dog last night, here's his collar, and my child disappeared, you're on the national news crying, that might get some scrutiny. Okay, it might cause some problems, might cause people to ask a few questions. So if you get too carried away, you might have some issues.
Well, Tyler Kokjohn, we wanted an hour. We got almost 2.5 hours out of you, so I don't want to squeeze this orange too much. Thank you very much for giving us your time and for being as open and honest as you are with us about your feelings on all of this stuff. I mean, I really appreciate it. I appreciate your skeptical mind and the way that it works. So thank you for involving yourself in our lives and in what we're trying to do here as well.
Well, I'm glad you guys let me participate. And I would like to say that we may have different operating methods and opinions, but we can still look at the problems and investigate things in a collegial fashion. And so that's sometimes, unfortunately, is lost. The other thing that I think really, I can't remember if we ever said this out loud in the past.
I love you too. Oh, wait.
That's pretty close.
Oh,
wow.
Sorry.
Yeah, the idea of investigating not with I hate to say debunker, but not with the nihilistic approach of I'm going to find out and destroy the experiencer experience. Okay, I can't, not putting this into words very well, but the investigation is about finding out more and learning more and not negating the fact that people have experiences. I would say that we start with the idea that people have experiences. We want to find out what's going on. It's not like, okay, if I yank this thread and one theory, let's just pick on Dr. Jacobs, his theory is wrong, then the whole thing is gone. None of it counts. No, that's not what we're about. That's not what my goal is to find out more, not to deny that there are paranormal events and experiences. So it's a little bit of a different mindset. And, what I don't want to do is end up looking like, well, Philip Klass, where I think that he got into the point where he was going to destroy his enemies, just destroy them. And that's not what this is really about and should be about, I think, in my opinion, in its best sense. We can do better than that.